Yeah, so that one's really cool.
I don't know if I've seen that one. I'll have to go look. The circle of ceremonial magic, just like that of science, is closed in principle, but every individual human soul can leave it by embracing a more elevated ideal and by renouncing all the advantages that the circle offers him. This is an important aspect of the meaning of the formula of Christ, I am the door, namely, that there is an exit from every closed circle, from all captivity in the spirit. So it is, being trapped. And Jesus says, I've come to set the captives free, right? I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture, which means to say that if someone is moved by the love of God and neighbor, he can enter each closed circle and he can leave it. Instead of prisons, he will find pasture, i.e., he will move in a spiral. It is thus, for example, that Teilhard de Chardin could enter the closed circle of science without being captured, and he could leave this circle by transforming it into a spiral. It is thus also that Saint Martin could enter the closed circle of ceremonial magic without being captured by it, and he could leave it by transforming it into a spiral. The spiral, this is the good news, i.e., the gospel, to all those in captivity in closed circles. Jesus Christ said to Nathanael, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree. Do you believe? You shall see greater things than these. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Heaven opened, it is the way of the spiral into the infinite which opens. Have you read it?
no, I've not read it. I own it. It's
There's a guy on YouTube. I don't know if he finished the last few chapters or not, but he read it. He records
yeah, I
he
think
records each chapter and he reads it really, really nicely, actually.
I have seen that actually. I think it's Daniel Townhead, perhaps, or
Yeah, yeah.
something.
Well,
Okay.
that's part of the reason I participated with Nate because I knew I would be reading.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think I've said this before, but I often read with audiobooks. So
Mm.
I'll have the book on audiobook and then I'll have it in my lap and I read.
Yeah.
So because I don't know, I think things should be said out loud. Like there's something
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
If it's not on audiobook, then I read it out loud actually. So I can
Yeah.
hear my own.
I
Yeah.
think that's awesome when you're talking about scripture and like the book of nature and
Yeah.
like how incarnational, vertical speech, that type of stuff.
Everybody loves the word. Nobody loves the flesh. Right? There's this disconnect. And I think it's interesting because to me that is the definition of incarnation, right? The word is breath, is
Mhm.
spirit. And it isn't bodied until it becomes bodied, right? So the word made flesh is a descent into the body. And I think we're doing that all the time. Like I was talking to Jed about yeah, and George also calls them live things, right? Words are live things. And I think that's really interesting if you think about it in a vertical sense, because it is spirit, right? And then his characters, he calls live souls.
Mhm.
You have to experience life.
So
Yeah.
good. It's so nice to talk with you. I have to remember that you're, a human being sitting here with me, talking with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Um,
a human
yeah.
being.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So that's one thing. But I guess, yeah, there's really so many things. But I guess one thing was that you had mentioned that you were curious about, um, like my
Yeah.
thoughts on astrology and stuff. So I did a
Yeah.
little
First of all, I'm curious about, how you got there, like how the interest came about
yeah,
for it.
yeah. Well, so how much like detail do you want? You know?
As much as you're willing to give.
Oh God. Yeah. Well, we could be here for months, and I wouldn't want to do that to
Well,
you.
let's not do that. We want
Yeah.
to get to the next topic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, trying to be brief without overly brief. Um,
Yeah.
I was not, my parents were like slightly like on the tail end of being a Christian. lineage, like they were kind of over it and not doing it because their parents expected it type of thing, that they
Yeah.
were in their own life not particularly faithful at all. And so, I went as a child a little bit, but we weren't, it was occasionally on Sunday, occasionally. And but I did get confirmed and I went through CCD and um all that. But, science, education, I went to a private school and, liberal arts and taught all that. So I was basically like, yeah, this is all a bunch of nonsense, you know. And then I went to college, and when I was at, I also started smoking weed before I went to college.
Hmm.
Um, and but at college, so that's kind of like maybe a gateway, just kind of bridge connection
Yeah.
here. Um, but when I went to college, I tried LSD. My roommate offered it to me, said, "Do you want to try this?" And I said, "Sure." And I had some pretty wild experiences, and um, powerful kind of insights into my own psychology, but also just some like revelatory experiences about stuff in general.
Yeah.
And and so that kind of there's lots that could be said about there about like the particular content of those experiences because that's something that I still attend to. Like it still interests me. Um, it's kind of connected as well to the stuff we were saying about the medium, et cetera, and like verbalized incarnational stuff. And but keeping on track with the story, I so that kind of sidelined me. Like I was completely
Yeah.
just boom, like totally had didn't see it coming type of thing, didn't know what I was getting myself into, you know, and ultimately looking back, I'm grateful for it. However, at the time, it basically destroyed my relationship with my roommate, who was like my only close friend at college, and my girlfriend. Uh, we eventually were alienated from each other, and um, my I came back home, but then I didn't go back to college for a second. For like, I went back for the first half of the second year.
Yeah.
Um, and my parents didn't want to keep me going, essentially, and I was trying to like, I realized that if I told them about what happened, it would kind of make things worse, probably. Like, um, so eventually, it's like, yeah, I took acid and I had a hard time, yeah, and it's all embarrassing because I'm like sitting there trying to integrate these experiences of like uh just numinous experiences
Right.
um and like most people it's like you just took drugs and you're insane. It's like
Hmm.
maybe there's some more nuance, but so it was difficult and I spent a lot of time uh trying to put the pieces back together and I felt very cut off from people and
Yeah.
that is kind of inevitably it's kind of like fasting, it like leads you to those sorts of mystical experiences. um it's like almost involuntary mysticism, like
Hmm. Hmm.
and I found myself spending a lot of time alone. I started out listening to a lot of like Terrence McKenna and Alan Watts and eventually Jordan Peterson, and that kind of
Yeah.
really brought
That
me.
filtered you. Yeah.
Yeah, but before I even got deep into Peterson, it was like uh lots of time in nature as well, and like lots of time. um it's very hard to describe, but essentially, um I guess what okay, so I did some more thinking about this astrology thing before we were talking, and from those original experiences, one of those mystical experiences, there was a very distinct feeling of like a dance-like participation with reality, where it's like I lined up with things, and then I was flowing in tune with like myself, with my surroundings, and so that was like a very that kind of stuck with me as like, it's a phenomenological thing that you experience as
Yeah.
like, um, and rather than maybe some like figure it out type of mathematical equation, it was like kind of like what Peterson says. It's like you feel that feeling of meaning and you want to like get in touch with that feeling. So that was a big thing. But then upon being lost in this imagination land, fairyland essentially, like
Mhm.
I um I would have some pretty wild like nature experiences where it was like in tune with like the wind, for example. Like the wind would like speak to me
Right.
and like very much so in the sense of like, all right, this is like a being. This is a living, nature is alive, and I'm in a
And
dance.
this is without drugs or with
Yeah, yeah,
drugs.
yeah, without try. I mean, I smoke weed like pretty often.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I wouldn't say that it was born of
I mean,
that.
it
It,
was without LSD, let's say.
yes. And for the record, when I smoke weed, I usually don't smoke large quantities. Like I like it's more of a subtle thing. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that was like pretty wild. It felt very feminine, like this was like a very kind of sensual, I guess, like dance kind of thing. And I just got a comment from Slicarius. Nice. Um, so yeah, that was pretty cool. And I
Are you
eventually
live? Are you actually live or?
no, 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 I got a comment on YouTube, one of the videos.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I wouldn't do that to you. Um,
Oh, I don't care. I don't care.
yeah,
But I just wondered.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. So in those experiences, there was like those ones in nature and stuff. There was times where I would occasionally notice. I would be like, "Oh, there is a full moon on this particular occasion when things are particularly intense or something like that."
Mhm, mhm.
And um trying to think of some other examples, but it was basically just like it kind of just struck me at some point. It's like if I'm having these kind of it's like this flowing dance participation, I eventually felt that like it wasn't featureless. Like it had,
Right.
there was some times which would be more flowing and sometimes which would be more restrictive or something like that.
Yeah.
And um yeah, and I don't
And
know.
you were, it's just so I get this, so I understand it
Mhm.
right. You were sensing that the cycles within nature itself were aiding and abetting to these different
Yeah, I don't remember.
states of consciousness that you were experiencing?
Yeah, to some degree, I don't remember how like I exactly made the connection to astrology, but like I I think it was just upon thinking like, yeah, there's these like the rhythmical Taoism was also a big influence, like through Alan Watts and stuff, and
Mhm,
next
mhm.
weekend I'm gonna
Yeah.
talk about Taoism. So that was like, that's a very flow with the flow of things and like the flow of things. I don't know. I don't know exactly what made the connection, but eventually I was like, oh, this maybe I'll look into astrology at that point it became more of like a almost like a scientific investigation, like
Yeah.
looking at this like under learning how to learning astrology, like the basics, like what do the symbols mean and like, stuff like that. And what do the signs mean? And it kind of it kind of was one of those things where it's like I realized that it does seem to like work, like it's kind of like it seems to accurately reflect things about either, like events in your own life or like collective events.
Yeah.
And um yeah, and that's pretty wild.
That the patterns that the heavenly bodies make, they are akin to to deeper patterns, to the patterns by which we live. You see one pattern. The pattern is made of a bunch of things, but that pattern nonetheless appears in its unity. And that's why it can be repeated. And that is, of course, what music is. That is what the dance is. That is what all of these the idea of the music of the spheres can help us understand. All of a sudden you have this image of the incarnate logos at the center of the heavenly spheres. So you can see around the logos, around the heavenly man, you have the signs of the zodiac that are turning around him. And you know, whether you're Christian or not, you can still understand the idea, which is that in our world, we experience pattern as purpose. We experience pattern as reason. We experience pattern as, you know, participation, as order. But all of that moves towards reason. You know, if I have a pattern of behavior, it is always towards a purpose. And then we realize that that's what patterns are actually for. And so every time that we experience multiplicity coming into one, every time we experience variability that suddenly appears as it's moving towards purpose, what's happening is we are experiencing the music of the spheres. We're experiencing the pattern of the cosmos, and it brings us great joy. Every time you see a great pass in a football game, you're experiencing the music of the spheres. Because you see these several players moving, and all of a sudden something happens. He throws the ball, and the other person is exactly in the right place. For some reason, they're not even looking at each other, but they know where to be, and he catches it, and we rejoice. Why do we rejoice? If you break it down to its elements, it's pretty silly, right? Why do we rejoice? We rejoice because we see multiplicity come into one. We see action move in pattern towards purpose.
And that's pretty wild. Like, I don't know, you know, it's like that's kind of, yeah, I guess that's the story. You know, it's like that's how I got into it. And it's still pretty crazy to me, you know, but it's
Yeah.
just yeah, so I guess a way of simplifying it would be that it's kind of like dancing with Sophia or like dancing with the logos. You know, it's
Mhm.
like Sophia would be that kind of nature, like you know, like the living kind of feminine presence, and but then the logos would be like this more in the way that I'm kind of framing it out. It would be like the, you know, the orderedness and the fact that there is a logic to the way that things happen, and like
Mhm.
it's not just like a meaningless random, you know, it's like there's a divine cosmic order, and it's like you know, we, and it would be like to,
Well, we call it the logos.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and so and exactly, yeah,
But
and so
but people think that term is reserved for either just for Jesus or just for um I don't know, some vague ethereal thing that holds all things together,
yeah,
but
like
they don't
large,
know what, and they
yeah,
don't even know what things, what all things,
mm,
like they're not somehow in a sense, I'm not saying everybody, but they, as you know, the quote unquote they,
mm,
not not necessarily willing to really say all things. Like if it's all things, then it would have to be all things. Right? Like it would
yeah,
have to be the sun and the moon and the stars and,
yeah,
you know, the wind and
yeah,
ants
everything,
and
yeah, 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 and
baby elephants and,
yes.
you know.
Yeah, so maybe in this way it would be like the logos of time, you know, like the way the place where time connects to the logos or something, you know, it's like or
Yeah,
or
I don't
just
know.
like maybe just the cycles in general, like where the solar system, the logos of the solar system or something, you know, like
Well, you know, it's interesting because when we went through Emil Book's book on Revelation, he was an anthroposophic Christian minister, like, you know, because they have their Christian community.
mhm.
And
Yeah, I recently learned about that. I didn't know about that until like a week or two ago, and That's
It's
interesting.
such a great book. It's such a great book
Well,
to
talking
read.
about the anthroposophical Christian community, like,
Oh, the
yeah,
community,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And then so he wrote this book on the book of Revelation. And I remember he him saying something, I can't quote it directly, but he said something about time becoming space, time becoming space. I think Tom Burke talks about it too, actually.
hmm,
Time opens up into space. Um, and that's about all I can say about it. But I just thought that was that seemed right to me, like intuitively speaking. It just felt right that time opens up into space. And then I think I went on a little rampage and I listened to a bunch of physicists about time and space because I got really interested.
hmm,
And there's a guy named Max Tegmark, who's a physicist, and he talks about his theory of time and space, which is super interesting. Trying to remember it now. It was quite a few years ago when I watched those videos, but I could send them to you.
sure, yeah,
Um, he talked about nothing ever going away, which I thought was really interesting. Like nothing is ever gone. It's all contained within time and space.
hmm.
But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna get way out of my depths, so I'll
Yeah, no,
just
the
leave it at that.
who doesn't love a good foray into the land of physics? Just wander in there
Into
like a
physics.
stranger in a strange land, like what's going on in here? I'll stay for 20 minutes,
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
He can enter each closed circle and he can leave it. Science is closed in principle.
Um, yeah. You saying time becomes space reminds me of how in that live stream um in which we encountered each other.
Mm-hmm.
I was just about to I had just mentioned
Oh yeah, you mentioned something and then disappeared.
yeah, I
Kind of
missed
like
someone.
Jesus.
Yeah, and then yeah, someone or something didn't want us to talk about that at that
Yeah.
time. Um uh and that guy who I mentioned has a YouTube channel and he also has a Substack and um he has an article called Here Time Becomes Space.
Who's
Um
that?
his YouTube handle is Galahad Eridonis. It's
Okay.
spelled Galahad like from the Grail story, and then Eridonis like the cons or Eridanus. I think there's multiple pronunciations like the
Did you
constellations.
do a recent video with a clip from his channel
Yeah,
about
yeah, it's the
yeah,
one
yeah.
the Cosmic Triad.
The cosmic
Yeah,
triad, yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So he's the guy who he created that image, like he calls it the cosmogram, with Abraxas in the center,
Right.
and yeah, and I'm not sure if yeah, I've kind of been a little curious, like whether or not if you are kind of have any thoughts or have looked at any of that. But
No, I
uh,
haven't looked at it. I haven't looked at it, but I mean, as far as, I mean, essentially, when I watched the video that you did, my first thought was basically the pattern there is the Trinity, right?
hmm,
It's a Trinitarian pattern of reality, is what he's describing. It doesn't matter what name you put on it, in my opinion.
I guess, but in the Trinity, wouldn't it be that like um, the um, all three are like, I guess you have God the Father is
Well,
superior or
are
something.
you thinking of equal? All three are equal?
Yeah, right. Isn't that what they would say?
Well, not really.
But they're all good. Like in
Yeah, they're all. Mhm.
yeah, it is Trinitarian in a sense. I don't know if it would be like Trinitarian incomparable to like the Holy Trinity, but like, yeah, it's this idea of the magical three. It's like good things
Well,
come.
yeah, because he
Yeah,
got into the Luciferic and the Aramonic, right, in that
yeah,
video,
yeah, yeah,
and Christ as the balancing,
yeah,
the balancing point.
yeah.
Yeah, and Bach talks about that too in the Book of Revelation, where he says that they are to be bridled and not destroyed, right? Like so,
Speaking of the passions, or
the Luciferic and the Aramonic,
oh
they're not
yes,
they're not to be destroyed, but they are to be bridled.
Yeah.
And he illustrates it, and it's a long time ago, so I can't remember exactly how. I should
Yeah.
actually read.
Yeah. And
Uh,
actually, please.
yeah, I mean,
I'm not trying to show for him right now. I'm just saying,
I don't
that
know.
was,
I'm thinking about the the good, the bad, the ugly kind of thing, and I'm not sure. Like when I say that there's a Trinitarian aspect to reality, what I'm thinking about is that relationality is based on three things, right?
yeah.
Like two people can be in a relationship, but something will always emerge from that relationship, right?
Hmm.
And traditionally speaking, it would be a child.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I, yeah, I think, yeah, I didn't mean to um push back too much. I just get worried about like speaking, Trinitarian, and also speaking about I don't want to speak for what this guy thinks, or I don't know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the um the yeah, I think it would he talks about how they're kind of like ambivalent in a sense on either side, where
right.
like, you can't have one without the other, and like they need to be in this productive opponent processing, you
Hmm.
know, um yeah, so what you're saying there about how like there's, I think maybe like instead of Trinitarian, maybe be like a triality of reality or something, like everything has a
Sure.
threeness or something. I'm not sure. But
Yeah,
um but yeah, so he has an article called Here Time Becomes Space, and um I'd be I would struggle to summarize it or even really remember exactly what was said in it. Um but I would recommend that. I feel like you would find him interesting, like his
yeah. Why don't
stuff.
you link me that
Sure, yeah, I will, yeah.
his Substack, and I can
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah, I would love to, because it honestly, it wasn't until like I found this guy's stuff that I feel like I kind of started to become sane again in some sense, in the sense that the experience that I had was so alien to me that I didn't um no aliens were involved, but um uh it was so out of the ordinary that I couldn't find anybody who had had like something kind of similar, where it was kind of like a vision of um I don't know, it was a vision of the way that things could be if we learned how to um more effectively communicate with each other, essentially, and like
Right.
and to like really encounter each other,
Hmm.
connecting to the idea of the body of Christ. And like, I didn't have any of that terminology at the time, but turns
Yeah.
out Christian people have been talking about this for a long time,
For a long time.
Yeah, and
Did you ever hear that? I don't know where I have it. Let me just see if I can find it. See if this resonates. I wrote something. Oh, here it is. I wrote something on a friend's Substack recently. Um, I don't know if you've heard it, but
I haven't
I'll just read it.
yeah, sure.
It's a comment that I made on his Substack. He was talking about the theme of face to face, and I said, on the theme of face to face, George MacDonald says in his Fantastic Imagination essay that a fairy tale is just a fairy tale, as a face is just a face. He also says, so long as you think my dog can bark, I will not sit up to bark for him. This last one he says in defense of not giving you anything of the meaning of his stories. He goes on to say, if it means nothing to you, then put it aside. I have thought long and hard about the face, God's face, my face, which I never see save for a reflection, and the face of the other. If I take Harding seriously, this is Douglas Harding that I'm talking about, they're all the same face. If I take George MacDonald seriously, I will never know anything but subjective meaning. I think they are both right. It is in the face of the other that I see myself and come to know myself, and the same is true for them. And for all involved, we are staring at the image of God. And image is how we see and speak. We are created out of and into the imagination of God. Images people are subconscious, and from there we derive our language, and in speech we convey those very subconscious images to our friend. And when he receives them truly, he has entered our consciousness, and we have become one in God's imagination. I don't know.
I did hear you
Yeah.
read that out loud in one of the streams. Yeah, I very much resonated with that.
The reason I thought of it was because you were talking about communication, right?
Yeah.
Talking about if we learn to communicate with each other properly, or
Yeah.
as God designed it to be, right? That's why I thought about it. And I mean, those ideas in there are really from George MacDonald's imagination essay.
Yeah.
Um, and and so again, it's a it's a three, it's a triad, right? Of we 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 convey our images from our subconscious to the friend. The friend then receives them, and at the same time, we come to know each other, not 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 in the sense that we now I know you and you know me, but we actually come to know ourselves in that exchange, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, through that relationality that we experience, if it's true, and I mean that with a capital T, then we find ourselves in God, right? And this is why Jesus can say,
Yeah.
where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am also, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
So I kind of like had that experience with my roommate back when I was tripping on the acid, and it was such a radical like experience. Um and like just the contrast of going from one extreme to the other like was just utterly fascinating to me, and I've been
Was it like a telepathic experience?
um
Is that what you mean, or no?
yeah, but also like kind of entering into, it's like when you are in God, as you were saying there, it's like that when you um are encountering things truly like in that way, and
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't so much reciprocated, but
Okay.
but
But it didn't matter.
yeah, it was like I'm here with you, and you can run away and that's fine, or to illustrate the point that like maybe he wasn't as excited about this particular, you know, I was very talkative, like I wanted to talk about this I was like crazy, like intimacy is wild, and like
Yeah, yeah,
seeing each other, brotherly love, man, it's crazy. And
yeah,
you know
yeah.
most guys aren't really predisposed towards that, understandably, and um
Probably made him a little nervous.
yeah. Yeah, I also think he had a bit of a crush on me, actually.
Mm,
And, and who knows, maybe I did on him as well. But it all gets weird when you're in acid land. It's hard
yeah,
to keep
totally.
things straight, as they say. Um,
Yeah.
but but that's all kind of aside the point. How did we get to the face-to-face communication? We were talking about Griffin. Griffin is that Galhead guy's name, his
Okay.
his birth name. We were talking about the triality opponent processing and how that kind of leads to this, where one or two are gathered in a
You're
way
right.
as well. Is that yeah?
This is what I just call the Trinitarian aspect of reality, right? Whether it's the Trinity, as
Mhm,
we call it,
mhm,
like George MacDonald says,
mhm.
right? In that comment that I made, I said it's one of his reoccurring phrases in a lot of his writings, and I love it because he's basically saying you can only name what you think you can see, right? But that's always yeah. what I think it's I'm pretty sure it's a McDonald quote that Luke uses all the time. What you see and hear depends on where you're standing,
Yeah.
right? So it's about perception. He's talking about perception when he says as you call it or as we call it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And this is one of the things Steiner loves to talk about too. It's perception.
Mm-hmm. And him saying, we have no idea. That was you quoting him, right? We have no idea what it means to be face to face.
That was just me. That was my
Yeah.
sentence.
Oh, beautiful. Like
I said we're clueless. We're
we're
clueless.
clueless. Yeah, well, I think I have a clue as to what it might ultimately mean. I think
Okay,
it
cool.
points, and I think you do as well. I think it points directly to this vision of the body of Christ in the consummation, and whether at some grand cosmic scale or just at, the turning of the ions every couple thousand years or something, or whether
Yeah.
just our particular slice in, this everybody has their own personal apocalypsis or whatever you want to say, but I think I think the whole idea of face to face and true communication between people where there is integrity and there is vulnerability. Um, I think that's kind of the way things are. That's where the kingdom is that way.
Yes,
I don't know.
that's right.
And
Yes,
yeah,
it
and
is.
that's yeah. And so I was kind of the hand waving madman for a couple of years, like about that. I was like, going to all my friends and family, like, like looking them in the eye deeply and stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's been a long, windy process, but suffice to say that, yeah, when I found this guy's channel, I was like, this guy there was some particular things like this idea of the bifocal vision, like one eye of kind of limitation or restriction, another eye of openness. Obviously, that's kind of a bit of a perennial theme, but there was just a bunch of overlaps in like the symbolism and stuff where I felt like I wasn't so crazy. I felt like there was other people who are having similar experiences these days, which
So
was
tell me
cool.
more about this eye, because the first thing that comes to my mind is the icon called the Pantocrator. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
When I first became Orthodox, I called it the wonky eye. The wonky eye Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and you got
What's
the you, what's the what?
what's this idea of the eyes? The
Oh,
eye of
well,
limitation?
yeah. One of the ideas that Galahad talks about in his videos is this idea of true vision, where when you find that optimal balance between kind of it's like what Vervaeke talks about as well about like relevance realization. It's when you find the perfect balance between ignoring things and reading into things,
Right.
kind of the autism schizotypy spectrum as well. It's when
Yeah.
you find that middle, then that's when you really line up. That's when you perceive the logos of things, and like,
Yeah.
but it's also a kind of a personal knowing thing where it's like you that's when like you're like being most of you, or
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
And so that resonated because I drew this picture. I have it right here actually. I drew this picture. I'm gonna take this out so I can see my face. I drew that shortly after those experiences, and it's got like that, and then he has a mushroom and a book in each hand. One of his eyes are open, the other one's closed,
Hmm.
and I wasn't a Christian at this time, so there's no like Christian symbolism, but it was kind of stuff like that.
Nice.
And so the three eyes, there was, I don't know. The point is that yeah, he has some. I think he's onto some interesting and compelling stuff. And his article where time becomes space um, was about um, Here Time Becomes Space is about, is I think the first one where he introduced the idea of constellating, which is essentially like when there's various points in time or space, really, you could think about like a maze,
Mm-hmm.
and like it takes time to go through the maze, and there's various points in the maze that are
Mm-hmm.
significant or meaningful. The ability to see those points all at one time and kind of abstract. It's kind of like Platonism as well, where there's like a form of something, like the through line or the logos. They're like kind of a quote unquote object, like a hyper object or something, um, in either in I guess time, where you would be able to um, kind of apprehend this uh, higher level entity, um, or object or whatever you want to say. And this is kind of how astrology works as well. It's like noticing the various points of meaning, and that these cycles have like it's like if there's a full moon in Leo this year, we might be able to glean something about the full moon in Leo next year. Um, and but his idea is much more complex than I could really describe um, now. But when you mentioned here, time becomes space. I couldn't help but bring it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has astrology um like, or maybe I should say this, has astrology helped you in any way?
Hmm.
And how, if so?
Hmm. Well, um, yeah. Earlier I said like dancing with Sophia or dancing with the logos in terms of like the order. And so another way of phrasing that would kind of be like a form of like Christian nature mysticism, perhaps, where it's like encountering the logos. Um, and so there's definitely a sense of like connection, like with
Yeah.
it's like seeing the order and like I don't know what word to use, but
Everywhere present and filling all things kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, it's like yeah, yeah,
It's
I'm
kind of
not,
an old phrase, well used.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like, that feeling like I'm not lost in some random meaningless swathing
Yep.
sea of rhythms that have no order to them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just a baseline helpful thing. And then like applying that in terms of actually looking at events and realizing that like the narratives that we find ourselves caught up in at a societal level, um, there's, I don't know exactly, I get hesitant about the metaphysics because we don't want to talk about like escaping the cosmic order or anything, like the idea would be to dance with it in a productive and
Right.
intentional, way, rather than like completely separate oneself from it or like, you know,
Which would afford you some peace
yeah,
and
definitely. Because
joy
then, yeah, because
and
even though,
patience
yeah,
and kindness
yeah,
and
yeah, yes,
right?
yeah. And
Like it does actually.
yeah, when you're able to like, um, yes, um, man, I lose my train of thought because, um, for whatever reason, but the point is that, um, yeah, you, I don't know, I get very hesitant because people get very touchy about some of this stuff, but
Just go for it.
I'm not trying to escape the cosmic order. I'm not trying
Yeah.
to, um, yeah, like, gain godlike powers or anything like for personal magical use or anything. It's like
Yeah.
it's but there is a sense in of being free in a sense from being dragged along by these patterns that are playing out at a societal level. Like the most noteworthy example that comes to mind for me is the when the lockdowns happened during COVID and stuff. Like there was a big lineup of stars, and this was before I knew about astrology. Um, I think I was like vaguely interested, but I wasn't kind of processing it
Right.
at that level. And there's a big lineup: Saturn and Pluto, Mars in late Capricorn, which is the goat, and and um there's really countless examples, but that one was kind of one that really stuck out in terms of like this is something that's mirroring something that's happening. So basically, what I'm saying is that you can tell the future to some extent. Like you can't tell exactly what's going to happen, but I think that there are like symbolic ways of understanding the nature of the time that you're in, or like where you are in some sort of um, part of the pattern. Like it would
Yeah.
be this would be the interacting with the logos of like the order, the logic of things. Yeah, and so that can be helpful for sure in that
Mhm.
sense that I was describing of like, not being swept along, maybe having some intuition of what might be coming, and then but
Well,
it can also drive you crazy. It can also you can read into things way too much and you can like, maybe apply it for your own personal like selfish purposes or anything. Like it can go wrong in a lot of ways, but at the core of it, I conceive of it as kind of like this mystical practice of like communing with the patterns of reality, like, and because we often think about the patterns of reality in terms of stories, and
mhm.
that's what's going on in my opinion is like we are in a story, we live in a story, we
A more
realize the story.
beautiful story.
Yeah, we don't realize the story you're in,
Yeah.
don't disenchant it, and
Yeah.
yeah, and um so it's definitely much of that vibe for me. It's kind of like this something that's has a sacredness to it. It's not like a, yeah, I don't know how to describe it perfectly, but so
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I think what you're saying is that it's alive. It's playing itself out in a way, right? Like
Yeah.
and um and if like when you use the term dragged along, you can't feel any peace or joy or patience or kindness or love or any of those so-called fruits of the spirit. You can't feel those when you're being dragged along,
Yeah,
right? Because then you're captive.
for sure.
And like I've thought about how Jesus says he came to set the captives free.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's it. It's interesting. Another thing I'm thinking about is the closed circle, right? Um, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's definitely a connection in my mind between this idea of the serpent going around and like the zodiac,
mhm.
and where we want the glory of God to like transfigure this in a way, not to escape the Ouroboros, but like to theophanize it or something. And
Well, like this is why I referred back to George MacDonald's phrase, as you call it, right? Because we can only name what we think we see. And I'm gonna try to I'm gonna try to collect some thoughts together here. Hopefully it makes sense. But Douglas Harding has a video that I really love where he says,
I believe there are two worlds, and they're vastly, vastly different. And the first world is the world we're told we live in, a world of convention, a make-believe world, a world that's determined by language and custom and convention that we're all told we're living in. Language is party to the construction of this as-if world, the world of convention. We know when we're very little we don't live in that world of convention. We live in the as-is world, the world as presented, the world as given. And as we grow up, we trade in that as-is world, the real world as presented, God's world if you wish. We trade that for the as-if world, the world of convention. and nearly all of us live and die convinced that the as-if world, the world of convention, mediated to us by parents, teachers, bless their hearts, and language, we live and die as if that is the real world. It's my experience that the as-is world, the world as given, before I start mucking about with it, when I'm simple enough to dare to look at what's presented, I say, in my experience, that world is woven of blessings. It's a world full of blessing. It's a world built to a fabulously beautiful design. And conversely, I find that the as-if or conventional world that we are asked to believe in is a pretty awful place. Man's world and God's world. And you know, the thing is, to get out of one into the other, I get into trouble when I use the word God. But substitute your own synonym for her. In the real world, God's world, if you wish, as-is world, and the conventional world, we condemn ourselves to living in. They say that nearer to you than all else is the eternal awakeness, awareness, reality from which all flows. Well, it becomes a matter of urgency at my time in life to get this matter cleared up, doesn't it? I mean, I look in my mirror, and I've been looking at this guy in the mirror for 82 years. And every time I look at him, he's nearer to death. He's a terminal case. He's been a terminal case for 82 years. And if I'm him, if I'm that one, gosh, I've had it, haven't I? I've had it. But you see, this as-if world, what does that say? It says, that's you in the mirror. Now, when we were very little, every mum here knows, every dad knows, that when we were very little, we looked in the mirror, and that was our friend. That was our friend in the mirror. It wasn't ourself, it was our friend. When we were very little, we were sane. We were sane, and we told the truth. And there was our little friend in the mirror. And then we grew up, and they kept telling me, that's Douglas, that's Douglas, that's you, that's you. I bought into that one, you know. He was a parasite. And parasites drain your energy, they debilitate, and they kill you. And it seems to me that the great delusion, the great nonsense of the as-if world, where the conventional world is that I am here what I look like there. And that's suicide. It's nothing less than suicide. Because this one is a death's head. It's nearer to death every time I look. If I'm that, I've had it. That is mortal. If anything is mortal. And when I take him and put him here, turning the thing round, mucking about with it, creeping up my arm, and putting it here, I've committed suicide. It ain't true. So he's here. So I suggest all of us go back from this meeting and look in the mirror to see what we are not like. Thank God. Look in the mirror, thank God I'm not like that here. It's a killer to be like that. It's a killer. And everybody knows. I mean, their hearts, our minds and hearts respond to this message that you are not what you look like. You are not what you look like. What you look like is very marvelous, and I'm enjoying it tremendously. But you see, it's on the way out. It's a temporary thing. The question is, what are you looking out of? What are you at 0 inches from yourself? I say the art of life to transfer from the as-is world, as-if world, man's world, the world that's a killer world, to transfer from that to the as-is world, God's world, the world which I say is woven of blessings. All we have to do is to come home to the place we never left, to who you really, really, really are, the eternal reality, the imperishable being from whom all come and to whom all return. And this is the most neglected place in the whole universe. I mean, I think this place we're going to point out is more neglected than the moons around Venus, and the black holes and the galaxies. This place really is incredibly neglected, and it's astounding that we neglect it, seeing that it is the very plumb center of our life, and we're going to point to that. But let's begin by
There's the,
pointing
as
at
you call
something
it,
else.
there's the seeing yourself and thinking this is what I am, right? And then there's looking at time and seeing it as flat and one-dimensional, right? Instead of understanding that it's actually not that. And when you believe all of those things, or when you participate in all of those things, right? You name the thing as you see it. You see yourself in the mirror and believe that that's what you are. And you don't understand time outside of its appearance to you, right? Then you are captive, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. We were talking about being
We were
dragged.
talking about Jesus saying, I came to set the captives
Yeah.
free.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. This, wow, man. What a beautiful connection, because this idea of the vertical time, it reminds me of
And that's what the closed world of the serpent is.
Yeah.
It's bondage. It's bondage, right? To the thing as we call it, right?
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus says over and over again, to him who has eyes to see and ears to hear. Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I love it in connection with this idea of Galahad's about constellation, this kind of vertical. I think the one that you were talking about, the open circle, how Jesus comes to set the captives free. It's to me, it was just a stunning overlap. He also, in that one, he also talks about the spiral,
right?
And because thinking about time in this, like, I'm very excited to see Nate's conversation with Pageau about the Ouroboros. Have you've heard about this? That like they have plans to do a.
Oh, I don't know anything
Yeah, I
about
guess
that.
Nate. I forget where I heard him say it, but Mr. Nate
Twitter?
Heil, Mr. Nate Heil said somewhere that he was planning to do a conversation.
Well,
With,
I know he mentioned something about it to him at the conference. So he had made an insight, or he had expressed,
yeah,
I think in a Q&A or something about his thoughts on it to Jonathan. And
yeah, I think it had something to do with the difference between like the flat or like the spiral or like the thing around the edge or something that he said.
world.
Yeah, I think he thought there might be some slight difference because Pageau made the connection between the snake wrapped around the tree with the
Oh,
Ouroboros.
that's right. Yeah. I don't know all the details. So
Yeah, neither do I.
that's
But
cool. I have a
yeah,
conversation. That'll be great.
yeah.
Oh, shoot.
But the idea of like our experience of time being like flat time, and then there's a way where we can re-spirit it with this kind of imagination or something, where we realize that there is kind of a depth to time, or something like kairotic time, as opposed to chronos time, perhaps, where
Well, there's the whole for me anyways, a realization that if you live in the present moment, you actually are living in a timeless world, right? And this is where flow would come in Verbekey's terms.
Mhm.
It's also where Jesus says, "Don't worry about tomorrow," right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
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 And then I'm just trying to remember now. There was I think it was Nate had a conversation with Chris Green, and Chris Green was talking about how Jesus didn't, when he was in the garden praying, he wasn't thinking about, oh, wait, was it? Before he was in the garden praying, he wasn't thinking about being in the garden praying or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and he was talking about that as Jesus having this like singular will kind of thing. But I was like, no, it's actually because he doesn't live in the future. He lives in the moment,
Mhm.
right? He lives in the now, which
Yeah.
is eternal. And if you want to talk about time and space,
Yeah.
I mean, right there is all of time and all of space,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It gets a little beyond me in that sense when it comes to,
Well, it's presence and presencing, right?
yeah.
So, like that phrase that I used, um, everywhere present and filling all things.
Yeah.
I think it's also pointing at that, the present, the actual
Yeah.
present.
I just think about, oh, okay, here's how I connect it. How I think about that is that we can actually expand our present moment temporarily, you know, to the
Yeah.
point where, like my present moment can be this kind of boom, 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 boom thing where I have no zoomed out present moment. Does that kind of make sense? Like every once in a while we get this feeling of, um, I feel where I am in time at a larger sense than just this one particular day. Like I feel this was a week ago and that was a week from now. But the problem is that this kairotic time thing is slightly different. It's like it's not just, it's like
Well,
where
how do you think of Kairos?
I think about it kind of as like,
Do you think of it as an opportunity, like an opportunistic thing?
um, no, I think about it
Yeah.
as like a compression thing. It's like when something is super packed with
Okay.
significance, because I'm just trying to square the idea of the linear um, kind of time that you were kind of alluding to with regard to, um, like, I think it had to do with Christ, like in the sense of, the eternal present now. It's like, how do we, if we're talking about astrology and stuff, how do we not get lost in like the future of like looking at charts and stuff, of like what's the chart gonna look like for whenever.
I
Uh,
think you don't get lost in that when you heed what Jesus said when he said, "Don't think about tomorrow.
yeah,
Sufficient to the day is the evil thereof." Right?
yeah,
Like there's enough to worry about, in other words, right? And
yeah.
so, I mean, I remember reading the newspaper. There was always the horoscope column,
Hmm.
and I'd always be tempted to read my horoscope.
Hmm.
And then I thought, no, because I don't need to worry about that. Even, not that I would have believed it per se,
Hmm.
right? But it, I've always been kind of puritanical about what I take in, because what I take in has to be, it's not always, but I want to keep myself um, virginal in a sense,
Hmm.
right? I don't want to be corrupted. And
Hmm.
I think part of being corrupted is a big part of being corrupted is worrying about the future, you know,
Yeah,
in and
yeah.
but I think that astrology in the sense like in a more
Perhaps kairotic way, in the sense where like when you look at the present moment, if you are if you know how to read like the stars, you can see where you are in a larger sense than just like what is this present? moment actually
Well,
mean?
here, let me
It's,
read.
you
I
know
pulled
what I
this,
mean?
I pulled up this poem because this is the poem about time
Sure.
that I wrote. Okay.
Cool.
It is liquid. I emerge. It drips from me, hugs my waist. I run my hand through it. Ripples and waves. Where do they go? What happens when they arrive? I run my hand through it. I lay back. It wraps itself around me. It is everywhere and nowhere.
Beautiful. I like it.
So, like I think that if you can imagine, I don't even know how I want to say this, time like that, maybe. Um,
All right. Would you mind reading it again in with like the what I was kind of getting from that was this idea of it like it's always kind of running away and it's not something that you kind of hold on to. So what you're kind of getting at.
well, it is liquid. I emerge. It drips from me, hugs my waist. I run my hand through it. Ripples and waves. Where do they go? What happens when they arrive? I run my hand through it. I lay back. It wraps itself around me. It is everywhere and nowhere.
I dig it. I like it. I don't know.
I don't know what else to say about it, really. But for me, it's like I get the sense that a lot of people feel like they're walking on top of, it's like a road. It's linear. It's a
Yeah.
line and they walk on it and they start here and they end there, right? You hear all this talk about the map and the territory,
Yeah.
right? And um to me, and I might have this wrong, but to me, a lot of um I think a lot of the understanding that people have of time is that it's more like a map, right? And in that poem, what I'm illustrating, I think, is that time is not, it's a space, right? It's liquid. I emerge from it. I lay into it. I run my hand through it, right? It's a space. It's not I'm in it. Like it's wrapping around me. It's dripping from me, right? So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It is very interesting. That's very I kind of have a sense for what you're saying. You know, it's it is a very curious thing, this because I really I see that
Okay, wait,
danger, like
let's because I that's like super abstract, you know,
the,
that poem. And but let's think about time and space as plot and place in a story, in a fictional story. You have a plot and you have a setting, right?
mhm. Yeah, that seems right.
Plot runs on a timeline, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And and but the space is actually what makes the story, I think,
Mm.
right? I heard it said, I think it was what's his face? Uh, the guy that is doing the documentary on the TLC.
I don't know.
Um
Can I show you?
Justin Wells. Justin
Yeah.
Wells.
After you
He
finish after you finish this thought, I want to show you something. But
okay.
okay.
He said that there's only like 7 plots available for
Hmm.
writing, right? There's only 7 plots. And I remember when I heard that, I thought that's really interesting because essentially it's the place that really makes the story. Like, you could have a story like Lord of the Rings, which is just rich with images, right, of the place. And the plot is probably pretty predictable in a way, right? It's like a hero's journey plot. But what makes it so amazing is the place, it's the space, and I think that's what engages the imagination. So anyway, I'll just
You
leave
know,
that all alone
you
now and
know,
you can.
kind of a little dip back into the physics first, kind of in the
Okay,
sense
cool.
that no, based on what you were saying just now, which is that I think if we're taking this really far out view of like the idea of that we're in a solar system that like has 7 planets, or and something about how that would condition the actual space, conditions the types of stories that can emerge or something, like where you have like the actual space and the time are connected in that way or something like that. I don't know. That's just what you were saying there made me think about that. But I want to
Yeah,
so
show me the thing.
yeah, so I just a lot of this talk, I think sometimes I'm also kind of like a visual kind of feel it out kind of thinker.
Mhm.
And Google Chrome. All right, can you see um all right, can you see this, or
Yeah,
can you see
see
my
that?
desktop? All right. So this is his article,
Yeah.
and um I'm not gonna like read all this right now, but some of the pictures I just feel like are really resonating with what we're seeing here in terms of this kind of verticality of time, um where like this is an interesting one. Um
Yeah.
but this one, like this type of thing, where this would be flat time down here,
Yeah.
and then this is like the uh almost like the logos of this down here, but it's like what is encoded in the temporality of this down here. And this is like a non-temporal, or this is like outside of time, such that it imposes things on the flat time in like a meta-temporal way, like it conditions various points in the time, or do you kind of see what I'm kind of getting at there? Like it's tough for me to, I don't want to butcher it, but
So this is what constellating is. Wait, go back to
so
that last image. Yeah.
um yeah, not talking about he but he has a bunch of other ones.
Do you want sound? Because we don't have any. Do we need sound?
No.
Okay.
So this is just like the one when you were talking about here time becomes space, all I could just think about was this. So
Right.
um um where this part right here.
Right.
Yeah. So that, and then in his
Which for me, I mean, to me, when I see that image, I just think of the now.
yeah,
Like if you notice that the eye underneath
hmm
corresponds to the top of the pyramid,
yeah,
which is in the center, which would be now to me. No?
yeah, no, that seems right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's something about like expanding the now as well, or like
Well, it's like playing 3D chess, you mean?
something
Doing it.
like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Or and it's also like I don't know, I'm not gonna try and summarize it here. I actually was just trying the other night. I was thinking about doing a recording of this whole, just reading it out loud, this article that he
Yeah, you
wrote.
should. Yeah.
Um this one right here, you can think about like a completed Rubik's Cube as like the teleological object of like all the possible Rubik's Cubes configurations, and where Um,
So when he uses the term constellate, is that for him a kind of this transcendent coming together of everything off that one-dimensional plane? Is that what it means to him?
um,
Constellating? Pulling it up
it's
out of the closed world of the serpent, let's say?
no, no. I think it would be more of like a to do something to do with like he calls it holographic Platonism, kind of, where it's like Platonism, like
Oh, yeah.
the
Okay, that's
form is
interesting.
like
We
yeah,
talked about that with Michael Martin once.
oh yeah,
I don't remember in connection to what.
I love that man.
Yeah,
Like
he's
cool dude. So so this idea would be like like this is the teleological holographic form that's like encoded in of
yeah.
this is talking about how the Rubik's cube, the center of each face stays the same. Sorry if I'm scrolling like a madman here. I'm just
It's okay.
trying to find the um like the center of the Rubik's cube actually remains unmoved throughout the
Yeah.
various transformations. So in a way you can like see the that the telos of the Rubik's cube, like that archetypal state, like shining through. And this actually connects back to the experience that I had in 2017 because what I saw in that experience, that peak experience, was a cube rotating with an eye on each face of the cube in the center. And this kind of connects to what we were talking about people seeing each other in that
Mhm.
if we recognize that like the kind of teleological objective view, like your hypostasis or like your guardian angel or like your the logos of you or something is always apprehendable in your eyes, basically. It's always shining through. It remains unchanged. Um, and and we can apprehend it and maybe act as kind of like a midwife helping it to be born into the world.
Would you call that the soul?
Yeah, that's another word. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe there's a way of also like solving the Rubik's Cube such that uh, we have nice smooth faces shining like an angel, you know, and um, I'm reminded of the Transfiguration as well. Like this is kind of
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
sense that I've been. So yeah, that's
So this is how you perceive it.
yeah, this
Okay.
is kind of my
Yeah.
um
Yeah. This is how
yeah,
you would
that's what I've
think
been
it.
thinking
Think
about.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so
I certainly don't think
really
about things in geometrical shapes because that's like way too mathematical for me.
or yeah, that's not like the way that that's the way that I that's what struck me when I read his article about this, you know, but at the
Yeah.
time when I had the experience, I had no idea what that cube meant.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
it wasn't until I read this actually, or I was like, oh wow, that actually connects
Oh, so that's
it
what.
connected well, this is a recent article as of I only read
Yeah.
this like a week or less ago, but
Okay. So
but
this is why you felt like you were sane after you read
well,
it.
there was other things about his videos that like I also think, you know, definitely because this one only came out recently and I found his channel a couple of years ago.
Right.
But this one actually helped me to make sense of that original experience in the sense that I didn't understand how the thing that I saw connected to the insight that I had about human relating and and this only struck me in the past few days, so it's kind of
Right. Right.
fresh in my mind. I
It's
haven't really
exciting.
yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
really spoken to anyone about it. But um so yeah, that's time becomes space. Astrology. We were talking about astrology and um, so astrology is kind of like constellating in a way where it's like there's a teleological object, maybe landing in time or something, where it's like there's a, um, you know, if we think about like the New Jerusalem or something,
Mhm.
it wouldn't be, it would be like something from above in that sense that's kind of like encoded or something, and then we can access it and then like manifest it or something.
I think, I think of all of that in terms of the imagination.
Yeah, I think you're
How I,
right on track. Yeah. I think
what's that?
I think that's right. Like, I think that's the
Yeah.
same thread, basically. I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the
So I'm
same.
trying to map on what you're saying to how I think about these things.
Hmm.
Because I definitely do believe that there is like this infinite thing, that from which we draw down. Um,
Hmm.
and like for me, I can only talk about it in terms of the imagination, and Douglas Harding's helped me to understand this even better because for him, because we don't see ourselves unless we have a reflection, we're headless, right?
Yeah.
So we can literally like take in the entire cosmos, right, from our neck
Yeah,
up.
when you said
We
that,
can
it
be
blew
the
my
whole,
mind. It blew my
we can
mind
be
when you
the
said
whole,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and so, but that also maps on to George MacDonald's idea of being in God's imagination. And then when I was talking about this once with Jess, I think, and I came to the realization that wait a minute, when we take from the imagination, so we have like a myriad, an infinite number of things we could choose from, and we pull something down into our bodies,
Mhm.
right? And then we create that thing that we imagine.
Yeah. It's
We have taken something from the infinite and we have made it finite. We have made the infinite finite, right? We've also taken the thing from heaven and brought it into our bodies and co-created, right, with God,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I think so.
And so that's how I would
Yeah.
map on what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think maybe like yeah, no, I hear you. I think maybe the bridging point would be like, or like the way the link would be like this idea of like the Platonic formal realm or something. Because like the imagination is kind of like that as well, right? It's like the imagination is like this where the pure forms of things can,
Well, what's interesting here though is
yeah.
like George MacDonald talks about the forms, but he doesn't talk about them in the way that Plato does. So for him,
I
um,
can still hear you. Oh,
yeah, we don't create ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. Only God does. We can only create with the things that we have that God gave us, right? So, and he goes all the way back to even language. So language is derived from the images that we see around us.
mhm.
And I've talked about this ad nauseum, but it's just so good. It's like every representation. This would be Steiner, this would be Barfield, this would be McDonald. All of the representations or the forms within nature are created out of nothing. But that's only something God can do. So out of his imagination, they're created. And each one of them is imbued with meaning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, sorry.
and the job of our imagination is to light that meaning up inside of the thing. And all we can do, even when we create language,
Yeah.
is take from those things around us, right? To create with. So we don't create out of nothing.
Mhm.
We create out of God's imagination, literally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of two things. One is just that, like when you asked about what does astrology help with, I think like that's kind of what we're doing. We're re-enchanting, we're bringing that, we're,
Yep.
incarnating the imagination in a way, like to reliven things. Um,
Well, if you think
there's
about
like
all
there,
the all the representations, including the planets and the stars, right? All of the things that God made, if you think about them in the way that George MacDonald describes it as everything being, containing meaning that God put there. And he says something like, if I have to get this quote right, God always means what he says, and we always mean more than what we say. So it's like we don't know the depth of the meaning, because everything that comes out of our mouth comes out of God's imagination, right? It gets drawn, all the representations form our language. And because God put the meaning in those things, it's always going to mean more than what we were actually saying. That's why when he writes a fairy tale, he says, if it doesn't mean anything to you, put it aside.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that
So,
personal iconic knowing comes to mind as well. Like this idea
yeah.
like icons are windows to things greater than themselves, and how those
But see, this is for me, if this elevates creation to a place of actual consciousness, which is what Rupert Sheldrake's always talking about, right? So there's a consciousness within creation itself, right? And shoot, I just lost my thought now. What was it? Like, we can look at an icon that somebody paints and it will have the forms, but that it's almost like it's two times removed. But if we go out into nature and we listen, like what you were talking about, you know, knowing that you're not alone, right? That God is everywhere present, filling all things. And it's all telling us a story. And again, now I've forgotten what I was, my whole point.
yeah. No, you were talking about how it's like that meaning is from God's imagination. Like it's
Yeah, but I was gonna talk about Sophia, because Sophia is the wisdom of God, and the wisdom of God is here. It's now. It's within creation, right? There's a creaturely Sophia, right? And there's a, I don't remember if it's called divine Sophia. That's what it is. And they reciprocate, right? They, whatever, this is on earth as it is in heaven. So, but that Sophia, that creaturely Sophia, is only here within the representations, or as George MacDonald will call them, the forms, but they're the created things, the things that God created, the trees, the grass, the wind, the sun, the planets, the moon, right? And so that is the wisdom of God. And I would also just go one step further and say it is the cosmos is the incarnation is the cosmos. The cosmos is the incarnation.
Yes, I'm with you on that point.
Yeah.
I love that. I like the idea that would you call that panentheism, or like
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah I think so.
But
Yeah.
I would prefer not to call it that.
Yeah.
Just because
Who needs the label?
well, it's just that there's varying degrees of panentheism, right? And so if I tell the story of a living creation, because scripture talks about it as groaning and waiting, it's giving birth to something, right? And I always think about it as it's waiting for us to realize the story that we are in.
Yeah, and this is the thing where it gets a little wild with respect to astrology, insofar as I actually think that we are in a particularly special time. I think that we are in
I think so too. Yeah.
yeah. Um, um, and the Bible uses terminology of like angels, right? And
Mhm.
this was like a old association that like the angels are like the stars in the heavens and stuff.
For example, when he's born, there's a choir of angels. A choir of angels is the same as the heavenly spheres. It's just exactly the same. There's no difference, right? It's just music coming from above, something which is revealing to us the great pattern, something that's happening in the world which is hiding in it a greater purpose and a higher pattern. So it's the same when we see people dance.
And I think there's lots of astrological symbolism like encoded into the book of Revelation that might be actually help us to understand the times that we're in and stuff like that, and see these patterns.
Mechanisms by which we participate in that music, but also mechanisms by which we train ourselves in the grammar of that music. And so it's both a participation, but it's also a training.
Well, the biggest advocate for astrology to me is the Star of Bethlehem.
It's true.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so these three wise men from where showed up?
Yeah. Yeah. And also,
and they knew something
yeah.
about Jesus?
But
okay.
But I also mean like in a bad way, in the sense that like the powers that be might also like, interface with these rhythms in a non-Christ oriented way or something, where um like I recently came upon a video about a guy who's making connections between upcoming events and the seven vials in the book of Revelation being poured out.
Right.
So after the Revelation 15 sign, the great and marvelous sign of the eclipse on April 8, 2024, the angels are told at the beginning of the Revelation 16 to go your ways. And that's what I want to show you now in Stellarium.
And like, I don't know if he's right or not, it was definitely interesting to me. I'm thinking about posting a video of it tomorrow, actually, like an edit that I was working on of it. A little bit nervous to do so, but I think stuff like that might be possible and actually helpful for us, like in this time. Like I don't know if I would go so far as Kevin or of not Kevin Bacon, but whoever Francis Bacon or whoever it was back in the day who said, that the Antichrist is going to employ these tools such as like astrology and magic and stuff like that, and he would say that we would have to learn them so that we know what we're facing, or
right,
like that.
That gave him license.
Like what?
Okay, you want me to go
Yeah.
for the kingdom.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of how like science came about, actually. Like in a way. So, right?
Nobody could burn him at the stake because he's doing it for the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what the point is there, but I think talking about realizing the story that we're in, like I think we're in an apocalyptic story, and not necessarily maybe like, certainly at least in its original meaning, which is like the ending of one thing and the beginning of a new thing, like it's like an unveiling of a new world, which inherently implies kind of the death of an old world. And yeah, I watched a video about the I learned some crazy stuff about the vaccine recently, and it's all I think we need to realize that we're the story that we're in, and I think engaging with these rhythms in a imaginative way actually can like help us in that respect as well. I think again, as I said before, it can easily spin out into like schizomania of seeing patterns where there are none and stuff. But I think if we're able to find that balance of like a right relationship with these things, it can really lead us to a right relationship with the logos as such, and particularly in this patterned way that it manifests, like the logos has these deep connections with the idea of patterns, right? Like Jonathan Pageau is always talking about the patterns. The logos of something is the pattern of the thing, and I I don't know, something about that really speaks to me.
So it would be a kind of a way of what, warning people about what's coming? Do you think,
I don't know.
I mean, how much, I'm just thinking about Noah at the moment.
Mhm.
He's like, oh, it's gonna rain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's something,
Yeah.
there's some kind of utility to that, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, I tend to take more of a let your light shine position.
Hmm.
George MacDonald says, that, atheism would vanish and unbelief would draw in its horns and all these things, right? If everyone let their light shine,
Hmm.
which would bring us into this. Well, he ends that whole sermon with the delighted consciousness it would bring us into a delighted consciousness of God and his Christ, right? So,
Delighted. Like, what do you mean by delighted?
well,
Like,
just just joyful,
gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then, which I find really interesting because in Judaism, the idea is that, uh, no man will have to teach anyone anything, when the Messiah comes,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So there's this, there's this knowing, or as George puts it, a delighted consciousness, right? There's this delighted consciousness that we experience when, Christians would say that Jesus comes again, or Jews would say when the Messiah comes, or whatever. We would be in this place of Christ consciousness, is what Steiner
Yeah.
would call it.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about the comment that you left recently about like the connections between this and the idea of participation and, the consummation, um, and how perhaps in a sense, Christ returns through us in a way. What do you think about that? Do you think, we're gonna see a dude? Do you think you'll see Christ shining in me? Or maybe not me in particular, but like,
He means Christ in his second coming, will take on as many forms as there are consciousnesses on earth to behold him.
Interesting. Wow.
He will adapt himself to everyone and will converse with everyone. His forms in an unimaginable way will simultaneously yield an image, one who appears in heaven surrounded by unspeakable glory. There will not be a single being on earth who will not see the Son of God and hear his word. This is Christ's second coming, and this will be the overthrow, the end of the beast system, the end of the Antichrist, the end of all of the darkness that we see in the present world of, since Event 101.
I,
um,
I
is this
don't
perhaps
want
like
to
a
say, I don't
useless
want to say
dichotomy?
I don't want to say what I think, because I don't, who am I to talk about these things? The day and the hour knoweth no man, right?
Hmm.
But um, everybody's waiting for something to happen, and I think that all that does is feed into our tendency to be future oriented instead of being now.
Hmm.
And so I like to think about the kingdom of heaven is in you.
Hmm.
Don't worry about tomorrow.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
um,
and this, well, yeah, to me, I'm just thinking about it in this participatory way as well, because like this idea of the kingdom is within you, I think is interesting, connecting it back to that idea of maybe the eye being kind of this one place where the form, like the
well,
idos or
Meister
the
Eckhart has this great quote. He says, "The eye with which you see God is the eye with which God sees you." So what do you think that means?
that one's always got me, in the sense where it's kind of like it seems like a little bit of a
Not
word
very
jumble. I
conventional.
know I get what it means and I'm with it. Like I think it's appropriate and correct, but the wording is just like it kind of is one of those ones that fiddles with you. It's like
Yeah, Meister Eckhart does that. Yeah, on purpose.
yeah. Yeah, no,
He's
that seems, I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, I think, I think it goes with what you were saying about this idea of being headless in a way, but also,
there's that, and there's also perception in there,
mhm,
right? And judgment and divine humanity, angels. There's a lot in there. There's a lot
yeah,
in that statement,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Image, divine image. Yeah.
yeah,
But essentially, it's that micro macrocosm relationship, right? And
yeah,
what I love about reading Douglas Harding is that he literally walks you step by step through the entire microcosm of your body, all your cells, and he gives them all their own consciousness, right? And he illustrates how they live within their own societies, like it's really Men in Blackish, right? But way before Men in Black. And then he blasts you right into outer space and he does the same thing,
yeah,
right? And so if you think about it in those terms, you're thinking then that phrase from Meister Eckhart has to come to mind. The eye with which you see God is the eye with which God sees you, right? And these are the kinds of things that you can't talk about because explicitly, I think, because of what
mhm,
George MacDonald says when he says, as you call it,
yeah.
right?
This is why I think we are actually in the most fervent agreement because, this is where, and I think part of it also comes in our shared love of nature, you being someone
Yeah.
has raised animals and such. Like, I think there is that direct experience of your phenomenological just experience of the world, and
I mean,
other
if
people in particular, it's just,
if you had a special someone in your life and somebody asked you to draw a diagram of what that relationship really consists of,
yeah, it would be
you
very
kill it.
difficult.
You kill it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, yeah, and I think that this is the thing, as when we talking about that, it's kind of like propositionalism. People like to throw around this word propositionalism,
Mhm.
left brainism. It's like there's a way of looking at images, or like, you know images that way, right? Where
Mhm.
we can, it's kind of like definitional seeing or something, where we, um Steiner said this. Steiner said that our uh our words are actually, all of them, two things about them. One, they're all gestures because the larynx is like gesturing. Everything is gesture
Right.
when it comes to communication. And then the other thing, he says that they're pointers. Like, not all of the words are just pointing to that, what's going on deeper, or
Yes. Yeah.
further in, further up, and further in, maybe.
Well, that's interesting because in that recent sermon that I read of George MacDonald's, he says, oh, I gotta find it because it's really pertinent to this. Hang
Please
on,
do,
it'll
yeah.
only take me a second. It's in my Kindle. He says, faith is that by which a man lives inwardly and orders his way outwardly. Faith is the root, belief the tree, and opinion the foliage that falls and is renewed with the seasons. Opinion is at best even the opinion of a true man, but the cloak of his belief. So it's just the outer cloak, right? Which he may indeed cast to his neighbor, right? He may offer you a proposition, but not with the truth inside it. That remains in his own bosom. The oneness between him and his God. And so then he says, let me search this one in regards to that.
Yeah, and I would say, hopefully I don't interrupt your thinking as I say this. Like, I would say that, and insofar as we are able to be um, integral in our communication, then the other person can actually encounter that truth in our bosom. They can actually they can be pointed to the point where we actually can experience the truth, that we experience the other's truth. And it's like I'm reminded of agape,
Well, what if
because in order to do that, you have to love, you have to be one with the other person, in that sense that you were describing about realizing that ultimately we are one. And
right?
and that is how but something about like the pointing of the words is, I think, key there, where
Yeah.
we can't get hung up on the
Well,
words.
they're like,
We have to recognize that there's always this um further thing. And this is a part of
like,
it I hate textual communication so much, but we don't have to spin down that
yeah.
unfortunate rabbit hole. Yeah.
Well, what he says here about opinion, though, is interesting. He says, the true man who aims at the perpetuation of his opinion, so he aims at that, okay, is rather obstructing than aiding the course of that truth for the love of which he holds his opinion. For truth is a living thing, opinion is a dead thing, and transmitted opinion a deadening thing.
Damn.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. We arrive at the present moment suddenly. Here we are.
Yeah.
The world spins around. It's glorious.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think perhaps, I don't know, maybe that seems kind of like a good spot to end
Sure.
now.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you some stuff. Phil, I think you mentioned something as well that you were thinking about sending to me.
Yeah, I would send
Um,
I'm gonna look for that Max Tegmark video that I watched. And then
oh,
and
I
maybe
have.
I'll send you the there's a couple talks by Douglas Harding I think you'll really love. He's really great to listen to.
Sure. Is it actually him speaking, or is it like
Yeah,
someone? Oh,
it's
cool.
actually him speaking.
When is he from? I'm not actually. I've only heard you
He
mention him.
he lived to be I think 90 like 98 or 99.
Hmm.
He wrote I think he published this book in 1952, and he started it in 1942.
Hmm.
Like, this is the one I'm reading.
Damn. That is. Look at that thing. Wow.
Yes. But it's so good. And
Cool.
it's full of diagrams. You would love it. It's all
Cool. Yeah.
kinds of little, like, let me see if I can find a page. He's just, yeah.
Yeah. Please do send me that, because I have a feeling I will enjoy.
So anyway, I'll send you a couple talks from Douglas Harding, and then the Max Tegmark video. I just making a mental note. And yeah, and if you want to, talk again, we can do that.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. I really enjoyed this, and I think there is further stuff as well that we could
For
talk
sure.
about, as there always is with any conversation. But further stuff that I'm keen to talk about. I suppose I don't know exactly what it is at this moment because I'm a little out of words in the
Yeah,
sense
me
of
too.
describing. But yeah, I'm
Too.
sure things will come to mind, and I very much enjoyed talking with you. So
Yeah,
do
me
again.
too. I'm glad we did this. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, my pleasure. Um, Trying to think of some witty or insightful closing message, but
Oh, hey, I'll read a little poem. A
sure,
little
yeah.
I wrote recently
Oh, perfect.
about spring. But I think it goes well with what we just talked about. Where is it now?
I was also gonna say I still haven't gotten to that other thing that you sent me about beauty. I was intending to.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
just a clip. I just sent you a
Oh, it's
clip.
real short.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
60-second clip.
Oh
I don't know.
man.
I don't know how to make longer clips, so
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll yeah, I was intending to watch it today, but I got completely sidetracked.
it's not a whole thing. I just sent you a little clip.
Okay.
A friend of mine sent it to me, and I'm like, that is so freaking good. So I
I'll
sent
check
it
it
to
out. Yeah, you said you send it to like all your friends.
I know.
That's cool.
I do that. I'm like, okay, everybody, here you go. Okay, so here's my little poem.
Cool.
Spring, a time of new beginnings. Do we think it only chance? Or could it be a holy nod, a father's loving glance upon his little children, the ones he loves so dear? He reads his stories all year long to those with eyes and ears.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry. Thank you for
Yeah, thank you too.
commenting. Thank you for talking with me tonight. I hope
Yeah,
to do it again. Yeah.
for sure. We will.
Cool. All right, Sherry.
Okay,
Wish you a
bye.
wonderful evening.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.